Hi, welcome to Mama's Natural. I'm your host, Rusty Red, and this is my 5th video in my introductory series, and I'm going to share a little bit about my labor and delivery story with my daughter, Gabriella. The last several videos I've been sharing the pregnancy and delivery with our son, and last video was my pregnancy experience with our daughter. So as I mentioned in the last video, we decided to do a home birth this time. And so when I first started going into labor, it was February 15th at 10 p.m. that I started getting suspicious about it. I had a lot of Braxton Hicks with her. For whatever reason, she put me into false labor several times. And I legit called my midwife and was like, oh my gosh, I think this is really it. And go figure, while I'm on the phone with her, my contractions, I had been consistently 5 minutes apart for an hour with 1 minute intensity. And while I'm on the phone with her going, yeah, this is what it's been, all of a sudden my contractions just dropped off. And I'm like, okay, I guess never mind, I guess false alarm. So I had a lot of Braxton Hicks with my son, but never a false pregnancy or false labor with him. So this was totally throwing me for a loop. But so she was actually born on her due date, which was really cool. So by 4 o'clock the next morning, which would have been February 16th, I was for sure, I had been 2 hours that I had been tracking contractions, and they went from 5 minutes apart for an hour down to 4 minutes apart. And I'm like, okay, I've got to call the midwife, because if they get any closer together, I don't want to risk having this baby without her here. So I called her up real quick and was like, hey, I'm pretty sure this is it. So she stayed on the phone with me for about 15 minutes so that she could kind of hear as I was telling her what I was feeling and the contractions. And she's like, yep. She's like, I think that's it. I think we're on. So I'm going to get my stuff ready and I'll be right over. And then my next call was to my mother. Her job was going to be to watch over our son. She does not do well. When I went into labor with my son and I was going through all those extremely excruciating contractions with him, she was not able to handle it. She has a hard time even when I was a kid, when I would skin up my knee. She gets very emotional and upset, and it's just really hard for her. So I knew that her being there when I had my daughter was not going to be a good idea. So I'm like, let me have you take our son and take him up to your house when things start to really get intense. And that way you guys can hang out. You can help me get snacks out and whatever. So I labored around the house. My mom came down and was helping me. We were cleaning, because with dogs, there's always fresh hair shed all over the place. So we went through and we re-vacuumed and mopped the floor that I was going to be giving birth in. And it wasn't until last minute that I actually decided for sure I wanted to set up the birthing pool. Because I was on the fence, the midwife left it with me. So we set that up and got that ready without the water. And then the midwife showed up and they hung out with me while I labored around the house. I just pulled out snacks. We talked, and it was very relaxing, much more relaxing than at the hospital. Even though the hospital did amazing, there was less stress. My midwife was right there watching me. She wasn't having to worry about taking care of anybody else. And it was just, I was able to just be in my own element. I was in my pajamas. I was comfortable. I knew that everybody was where they were supposed to be. And when I would go into a contraction, the midwife's assistant would come up and give counter pressure, which I wasn't able to have that option at the hospital. We didn't do a doula, and we didn't go to any, Lamaze classes, where you learn kind of how to breathe and your partner learns how to assist you through labor and delivery. We didn't do any of that stuff, so I didn't really realize it was a thing. But the midwife is just like, hey, we're going to just try some things and you tell us if it works or not. And so the counter pressure ended up being what was helpful, because I guess I had a lot of back labor with my first, and I was starting to have a lot of back labor with my second. So they were doing counter pressure, and that really actually did help a lot, surprisingly. So it was about 9 o'clock in the morning when I started feeling like it was time to start pushing. And by the way, my husband is still gone. By the way, he's still at AIT training for military. So here I am. I'm alone. My mom, I just sent off because I was starting to get a little bit vocal with the intensity. And so I sent my mom and my son off back to their house. And so it's just me, my midwife, and her assistant, which was, I trusted her, but at the same time, it was hard not having a family member in the room with me. So push contractions were starting. I clumb into the pool. We filled it up, and I clumb into the pool. I wanted to labor as much as possible outside of the pool, because I've heard a lot of moms said that they would get in earlier on, and baby just wasn't coming. And then once you're in, it's kind of hard to get back out. because then you get, the water starts to get cool. You want to get back out, and then you get cold. And when you get cold, it slows labor down. So we actually had huge pots on the stove that we were boiling water in. And when it would get to a certain temperature, we would add that in, and they would pour that right over top of my lower back in the water. It wasn't hot enough to burn me or anything, but it was definitely warm and extra soothing. So it was about 10 minutes in the birth pool and things started just getting, it was 10 minutes of hell for me. So if you heard the previous video on my son's labor and delivery experience, it was pretty rough, but I also had an epidural. So I could feel the push contractions happening, but I wasn't feeling the pain aspect of it like I was this time around. So this was a major shock for me. I didn't realize what I was going to be going through. I had an idea, but I didn't have any previous experience for it. So I'm on my knees. I have hip problems as is, so I was on my knees, leaned over the birth pool, and it was just about 10 minutes in, and my hips were just screaming. It was in so much excruciating pain, and I was actually getting stuck, and my legs were starting to extend out to the sides on me. They were kind of sliding out from under me a little bit, and I couldn't get myself back up because they were just hurting so bad, and I was kind of stuck. So just as she started to crown, I felt the water break, and I'm like, I think water just broke between intense breathing, and the gal's like, okay, we're gonna have to move you onto your back so that we can kind of slow things down a little bit because you're pushing way too hard, too fast, and we don't want to risk a repeat of that previous tear. So they kind of helped me up onto my back to give my hips a break. Well, I shouldn't say on my back. I was kind of sitting on my butt, leaned back, and with my knees kind of up to the sides a little bit, which I think it was good that we transitioned. I know a lot of moms are like, oh, that's a horrible position to get moved to, but it actually worked out for me really well. So my hips were it was just not a good position on my knees before, and standing up, I was too weak to stand from the strain of trying to push. So baby finally crowns, and at this point, her head comes out, and I'm just sitting there. My body just lost everything. It just lost every bit of oomph it had. I just couldn't even push. My body just couldn't muster anything to push. So she hung out with her head outside in the water for up to a minute. And it was about that time I was just crying out, and I'm a religious person. I'm a Christian. And so I may make reference here and there to my beliefs. I'm going to try to keep it kind of on the low because I don't want to make any moms that don't have religious views uncomfortable or push you into leaving my channel. But you'll probably hear me mention it here or there. So I was just crying out, God, give me strength. God, help me. God, help me. And he answered back, and he did. He gave me the strength, and I was able to muster up enough to just push one more good push. And out she came. It was scary because she had been under the water for so long, but I kept having to remind myself, she's been in the water all this time. It's okay for her to still be underwater. She's, it's not like her body has come out yet. The chest, when it goes through, is when it actually pushes all that fluid out of their lungs and kind of pushes them to take their first breath. And plus, they have the umbilical cord full of oxygen still. So I'm like, okay, she's okay. She's okay. Moms do this all the time with water births. It's okay. And then she comes out and flops up onto my chest real quick, and she just starts screaming, and it's this loud, healthy baby scream, and it's definitely a girl scream. It was very dramatic. But it was an overall an amazing experience having that water birth. Even though those 10 minutes were the worst 10 minutes of my life, I will redo that birth over and over again versus going back to the hospital again. Just the epidural experience, I still have permanent back pain where I got the epidural, and it just led to a host of other complications that took a long time to recover from. Not to mention, it kind of caused a little bit of extra stress to me and baby. So this home birth was amazing. I did as natural as I could. We didn't do any eye ointment. We didn't wash the vernix off the baby. We left that all on. And we let the umbilical cord completely drain white before we cut it. And then, of course, I kept baby in my chest for a few hours before they weighed her. So she was born at 9:10 a.m., February 16th. She weighed 7 pounds, 1 ounce, and she was 19 inches long. And just the beautiful little chubby baby. And my son, actually, he was like this string bean with He kind of reminded us of the wavy inflatable arm man, honestly, when he was first born. So it was just cute seeing the difference between how my son looked versus how my daughter looked when she came out. And she was just all squish and pudge, which kind of took after me. I was kind of the Pillsbury dough baby when I was born. So it was an amazing experience. The midwife was awesome. She came back to the house and checked on me several times over the next week or so to make sure everything was going well. And oh my gosh, the stress-free after birth of just sitting on the couch with the baby and not having nurses coming in every few minutes checking on everything and this and that, and you're in your home, it's relaxed. My mom stayed for a couple days after to help with our son, and it ended up being we got sick. I'm not sure if I got sick. I threw up this time as well, so I threw up with my son, and then I threw up this time as well, just one quick throw up. But when I threw up, it was in the middle of a contraction as well. So when I inhaled, I think I ended up sucking in a little bit of that. So I ended up with a little bit of a kind of an infection trying to start up. But we were able to knock that out by the end of the week. So my son, however, a couple weeks later, I think the stress of everything just overwhelmed him, and he didn't have a fever or anything, but one day he just started throwing up. So my mom had to come back down and help with caring for him. He was just, I'm still on the couch with a newborn baby, and he's just puking his guts out. But fortunately, because this labor was so relaxed and so smooth, and I was able to feel my push contractions and breathe through things properly. There was very, very minimal tearing. I didn't even get stitches or anything. We kind of debated on it, but in the end, we decided not to do stitches. Worked out good. And so within a day, I was able to get up and move around. I had to be careful a little bit because I could kind of pass out. I've always been anemic a little bit, and especially after birth. So my mom had to stay on mainly just to make sure that I could handle both kids by myself. And I think about 4 days after, I was like, okay, I got this, Mom. Just because having my mom in there was great and helpful, but having her in there kind of affected the dynamic of me and Asher. And so he was starting to struggle a little bit, and I just wanted to get back to our old routine as much as I could for him. So I sent her on home, and I took over the kids after 4 days. And 2 weeks later, my husband came home and got to meet his beautiful baby girl, and that pretty much wraps up my labor and delivery experience. I absolutely would go back and have redone my son's birth and done a home water birth. And from here out, if I have any more children, it will be a home water birth unless there's some major complication. But so I don't really have a history of that in any of my family, either side, his or mine. So that wraps that up. Like, subscribe, and share in the comments below. How did your second delivery go compared to your first? Do you feel like there was a lot of major differences? Did it turn out the same? Did you do a home birth either time versus a hospital birth, and what did you think the difference felt like for you? See you in the next video.